Welcome back to Palestine Bookshelf. I'm Stephen Heiner, and today we're going to be discussing Decolonizing Israel, Liberating Palestine by Jeff Halper. I've done a longer, more detailed version of this review on my other channel. I'll put a link to that in the description as well as a card for it. So if you'd like to see an even longer version of this review, feel free. This one I'm going to try to stay focused and on just a few items that I may have covered in the last review, but I'm just going to focus on for purposes of this one. Now, I would say that one of the main purposes of this book is to push the idea of one democratic state. That's what you can see here in the map on the cover. But we need to sort of set the stage for why is this a conclusion that Halper draws. So let's start with the Balfour Declaration. Even more significantly, the pro-Zionist wording and spirit of the Balfour Declaration were then incorporated into the League of Nations mandate over Palestine, which the British received in 1922. So I have to be clear here. There's a great article in the Journal of Palestine Studies that just came out recently, which questions the legality of the mandate. There's all sorts of problems with the timeline, that the Turks had not properly ceded this land, and basically the British just claimed it, but there was no clear succession. I'm going to leave that aside. Halper's not getting into that here, but I do want to make sure that that question mark is put. As I learn more about things, I don't want to simply accept assertions that are in texts, and I don't think Halper is making that assertion in this way because I don't think he's probably done the research on it. But there is a huge question mark over the legality of the British mandate, which then leads to a whole bunch of other questions. The mandate's preamble repeated the Balfour Declaration's support for a Jewish national home in Palestine, but made no provisions for Jewish national aspirations. The mandate went on to specify the policies and structures necessary for the establishment of a Jewish national home, an innocuous phrase used by the Zionists to conceal their aspirations for establishing the Jewish state in Palestine. Article 4 of the mandate permitted the establishment of a Jewish agency, a keystone national institution of the settlers' state in the making. No parallel Palestinian national institution was mentioned or approved. Article 7 provided a process of Jews receiving Palestinian citizenship, which is a bit of a funny phrase, isn't it? Jews receiving Palestinian citizenship. So I do want to point out that the phrase national home had been wordsmithed by various Zionist congresses and groups around the world. How can we say what our goal is without leaving it all in the open? If you just say an establishment of a Jewish national home in Palestine, that does not mean, at least it can be read, not meaning the same thing as we're going to take over all of Palestine and make it into a Jewish state. That would have been resisted. But if you say the establishment of a Jewish national home, this was still resisted in many ways, but it sounded as if we're going to take a little corner of this and have a lot of Jews living there, we're going to call that the Jewish national home. That's the entire sense of the phrase of establishment of a Jewish national home in Palestine, not make Palestine the Jewish national home or the Jewish state. So national home, state, these words are chosen specifically, and it's important to know that early on. So as Zionists are building towards what would eventually come the Jewish state, what are the arguments that they make? And what comes out in the Declaration of Independence for the Jewish state, which comes after May 1948. The land of Israel was the birthplace of the Jewish people. Here, their spiritual, religious, and national identity was formed. Here, they achieved independence and created a culture of national and universal significance. Here, they wrote and gave the Bible to the world. Secondly, exiled from Palestine, the Jewish people remained faithful to it in all the countries of their dispersion, never ceasing to pray and hope for their return and restoration of their national freedom. Impelled by this historic association, Jews strove throughout the centuries to go back to the land of their fathers and regain statehood. So Halper says all three of these assertions have been debunked by historians. Well, I think we can take on the last two first, which is the idea that the Jewish people remained faithful to Palestine, never ceasing to pray and hope for the return and restoration of their national freedom. If that were true, why is there still a Jewish diaspora? If the Jews have been longing and dreaming to return, why have most of them still not returned? If we were to say there's 15 million Jews and let's say 7 million live in Israel, that means the majority of Jews live outside of Israel. So this assertion seems to not be borne out by the facts. If it were true that all Jewish people have always remained faithful to the land of Palestine, why did they have to be forced to come back? Sometimes through bullying, sometimes through other tactics. I'll put a link to Alison Weir's Against Our Better Judgment. She chronicles times in which Zionist forces basically contrived to force people to go to Palestine who didn't want to go. So this assertion seems to be absurd on its face. If it were true that the Jewish people remained faithful to Palestine in their minds and always dreamed of going back, then they would have all gone back. Jews strove through the centuries to go back to the land of their fathers and regain statehood. Again, this is not true. Jews lived in Palestine since the time of Christ, and some of them never left. So the idea of trying to go back, it assumes that there were no Jews there. There were plenty of Jews in the immediate area, whether they're in Iraq or Morocco or Egypt. So regaining statehood was not really on the table until the Zionist project came along. So it is not true that Jews strove throughout the centuries to go back to the land of their fathers and regain statehood. There's no historical evidence for this. Now, as for the first one, the land of Israel was the birthplace of the Jewish people. Here their spiritual, religious, and national identity was formed. Here they achieved independence, created a culture of national and universal significance. Here they wrote and gave the Bible to the world. I don't know enough about Jewish history to comment intelligently on this, but it seems to me, on the whole, to be not inaccurate. However, the tenuous claim that because we were born in this area, let's say as a people, even though they're not indigenous to land, even the Bible indicates that they came from another part and then they settled there, that gives them an eternal deed of ownership to the land is dubious. It's dubious even from their own scriptures. So all three of these points are pretty tenuous. Now, what are they doing in order to build a Jewish state? They have to have Jewish labor. They have to have Jewish economics in place, and part of that means getting rid of the labor, getting rid of the economies that are already there. Borrowing agricultural models from Germany as it settled Slavic lands, this is the Zionists, understood that this form of collective, which would be like kibbutzim and moshavot, cost-effective farming could replace wages with communal life. It is this innovation, funded by the Palestine Office of the World Zionist Organization, the WZO, the Palestine Land Development Company, and the Jewish National Fund, JNF, which gave birth to the doctrines of conquest of labor, kibush ha'avoda, and Hebrew labor, avoda ivrit. By eliminating wage labor and utilizing cooperative living, pioneering socialist settlement as a vehicle of colonization, the Zionists created an exclusive Jewish workforce immune to competitive Arab wage labor. The conquest of labor within a collective that could be established on nationalized lands acquired by the WZO led to and made possible yet another Zionist principle, kibush hakarka, conquest of the land. By the start of the 20th century, the Zionist leadership had wholly adopted these settler colonial methods. Settler projects revolve around acquiring territory. By definition, then, the ability of the settler community to seize the targeted territory depends on its ability to get the local tenants out. Judaization is a term used frequently since the start of Zionism. It continues to be used by the Israeli government, as in the policy of Judaizing the Galilee, though less contentious terms like redeeming the land, Geulat Haaretz, are preferred. In either case, the clear intention is to transform an Arab country into a Jewish one. In practice, then, the flip side of Judaization is de-Arabization, population management folded into the management of the land and the economy. Arab peasants found themselves increasingly concentrated in impoverished urban shantytowns. By the 1920s, resentment and resistance had ignited ever more organized resistance, leading to the Arab Revolt of 1936 to 1939. So the method was not by chance. The movement of taking over an economy, getting rid of the Palestinians, and making exclusive Jewish zones, and then calling it redeeming the land, conquering land. These were all intentional things, and they date back early on in Zionism. So it isn't some late innovation, or it isn't something that just happened accidentally by in the course of events. So, what happens in 1948? What happens in 1967? You have military laws that now govern the areas that are occupied. And most people are not aware of these laws, but a lot of them already existed during the mandate. On the very day of Israeli sovereignty, May the 15th, 1948, the Knesset adopted all 170 mandatory statutes the Jews had so bitterly criticized as anti-democratic and even Nazi-like before statehood. All the laws, that is, except those regulations that restricted Jewish immigration and land purchase. With the military government, the state transferred considerable sovereignty to the military. The fact that the policing of Israeli Arab citizens within the state of Israel had been given to the military gave the military government more an appearance of occupation than civilian control. The Knesset continued to add new laws, ordinances, and orders to the emergency regulations. Law and Administration Ordinance Number 1, for example, declared the country to be in a national state of emergency, in which it remains until this day. This suspended much of due process. Cabinet ministers, together with the military governor, were empowered to issue emergency regulations of their own. They could suspend or amend any law for reasons of defense or public security. Article 125 allowed local governors to declare any area of the country a forbidden or closed area which no one can enter or leave without a written permit from the military commander or his deputy, failing which he is considered to have committed a crime. Article 124 empowered the military authorities to impose a curfew in any area for any length of time. Articles 122 and 126 empowered the military governor to prevent the use of specific roads or roads in general. Article 109 gave the military government the power to banish people or hold them under house arrest for an unspecified period without legal recourse. Article 111, commonly used today in the occupied territories, allows administrative detention of any person for a year, renewable, with no charges or trial. Articles 94 and 96 forbid the printing of newspapers or any document containing matter of political significance without a permit. Arab citizens were tried in military courts whose decisions, in accordance with Articles 34, 46, 47, 48, and 50, could not be appealed, including sentences of life imprisonment and even death. More of these get added leading up to 1967. Military Order 59, for example, grants the Israeli custodian of abandoned properties the authority to declare uncultivated land as Israeli state land. Order 270 designates a further 1,000,000 dunams, which is about 250,000 acres, of West Bank land as closed combat zones, which are then handed over to settlers or Israeli infrastructure. Order 363 imposes severe restrictions on construction and land use in yet other areas zoned as nature reserves. Order 393 grants any military commander in Judea and Samaria, which is what the Zionists call the West Bank, the authority to prohibit Palestinian construction to ensure the security of the Israeli army or, quote, public order. Military Order 107 bans publications, including works on Arabic grammar, histories of the Crusades, and studies of Arab nationalism. Military Order 998 requires Palestinians to get Israeli military permission to make a withdrawal from their bank account. So, as you hear all this, you think, okay, well, Stephen, we haven't really talked about one state as an idea. And that's because for most of the book, Halper is setting the stage. He assumes that people may not have read about the history of Palestine, and he wants to educate them. So I would say that's the first 2/3 of the book before he can get to the idea of, well, what does one democratic state look like? And he isn't providing himself as the arbiter of that. He calls himself a colonist who refuses. So he's an Israeli, or he moved to Israel. He's an Israeli, and but he wants to participate in a liberation. But he knows that he needs to hold himself back as as part of the problem in a way, right? So if he calls himself a colonist who refuses, he wants to make sure that he's participating in letting Palestinian voices really take the lead. So the book is less a prescription and more of a summary of some of the ideas that have been discussed. So I'll read those now. The historic land of Palestine belongs to all who live in it and to those who were expelled or exiled from it since 1948, regardless of religion, ethnicity, national origin, or current citizenship status. The implementation of the right of return for Palestinian refugees and their descendants in accordance with UN Resolution 194 is a fundamental requirement for justice and a benchmark of equality. It also signifies Palestinian national sovereignty, the ability to address one's people's needs with a significant measure of self-determination. Any system of government must be founded on the principle of equality in civil, political, social, and cultural rights for all citizens. The regime of ethno-religious nationalism should be replaced by a constitutional democracy based on common citizenship, thus enabling and fostering the emergence of a shared civil society. The recognition of the diverse character of the society, encompassing distinct religious, linguistic, and cultural traditions and national experiences. Constitutional guarantees will protect the country's national, ethnic, religious, and other communities. There must be just redress for the devastating effects of decades of Zionist colonization in the pre- and post-state period, including the abrogation of all laws and ending all policies, practices, and systems of military and civic control that oppress and discriminate on the basis of ethnicity, religion, or national origin. The creation of a non-sectarian state that does not privilege the rights of one ethnic or religious group over another, and that respects the separation of state from all organized religion. In articulating the specific contours of such a solution, those who have been historically excluded from decision making, especially the Palestinian diaspora and its refugees and Palestinians inside Israel, must play a central role. Putting into place an inclusive economy offering economic security, sustainability, meaningful employment, and just compensation. Acknowledging a connectedness to the wider Middle Eastern and global community that requires engagement in creating new regional and global structures of equality and sustainability upon which the success of local decolonization ultimately depends. Now, as I say, I don't necessarily agree with all these points, and there are probably many people in the one democratic state movement who take issue with various parts of this. I think Halper is just trying to give a general sketch of ideas around what one democratic state would look like. I think probably one of the most difficult things would be the creation of a non-sectarian state. Um, the idea of separation of a state from a religion is a very new concept in human society. It's a slightly crazy one, but it's one that lots of people have bought into, leading to the destruction of a lot of countries. That's a different discussion for a different time. But I do want to note that it'll be one of the most contentious things that is pulled off if one democratic state comes together. And all the other things are somewhat subordinate to that, I think. So we'll see. We'll see how that comes together. But as I say, this is an idea of hopefulness. It's not such a question of, oh, here are all these obstacles, so let's shoot holes into why this could never happen. As Ilan Pape has often said, there is already one state from the river to the sea. The question is it going to be a Jewish state in which apartheid is practiced? Or is it going to be a state that is either secular or something else in which all citizens, everyone in it is a citizen, there is no apartheid practiced? That's an open question. The necessary rebuttal always to the one state question is, what about the two-state solution? And so Jeff addresses this towards the end. The two-state solution works and has been accepted by the international community. Why abandon it now? And so that idea, I think something like 154 countries have accepted the quote-unquote two-state solution. And I can't say it any better than Jeff is going to say it, so I'm just going to read. Had it been implemented, the two-state solution might have worked, even if it wasn't fair. Palestinians would have had a viable, sovereign, if small, state on 22% of historic Palestine. Refugees could have come back, albeit into a small state. The Palestinian state would have had borders with both Israel and two Arab countries, Jordan and Egypt, as well as a seaport and airport in Gaza. The international community, of course, accepted the two-state solution already in 1967. The PLO officially accepted it in 1988, before the Oslo peace process, and in 2002 the Arab League did as well. But Israel rejected it. And that is the most salient point around why the two-state solution has not worked, cannot work, will not work, is because Israel does not accept the two-state solution. There is no idea of the Palestinians being a people. They talk about the fact that you can't occupy land when you are the indigenous people. So they don't even like using the term occupier. They don't like using the term settlement. Yishai Fleischer uses the term so-called West Bank, so-called settlements. And he represents the majority opinion of the settlers who are crazy people. Israel governments going back to 1967 have rejected the notion of a viable sovereign Palestinian state alongside Israel. They even reject the very fact of occupation. Instead, Israel annexed East Jerusalem and moved 700,000 settlers into the territory that would have been a Palestinian state. It confined 95% of the Palestinians to the tiny islands of areas A and B in the West Bank and it besieged Gaza. In January 2020, Prime Minister Netanyahu announced that Israel would annex the Jordan Valley and all the settlements in accord with Trump's deal of the century, without even offering the annexed Palestinians Israeli citizenship. Nor is there any will on the part of the international community to sanction Israel or force it to withdraw from the occupied territories. So, true, while the two-state solution may have worked, it was never accepted by Israel. Regardless, it is now dead and gone, buried under massive settlement blocks, and as I said in my last review on this book, under the bodies of men, women, and children. We must move on. So, as I say, you can check out my longer review. I linked to that already in the description. But if you want to support the channel, you can hit like, subscribe, share this review with people who have never heard of the one democratic state idea and want to know where there's a charter and some information about it. As I say, this book gives an outline. I'm sure there are other books which I'll go into at some point to learn more about solid ideas for how one democratic state could actually be pulled off. If you'd like to support my work, you can buy me a coffee, send me a PayPal. Those links are in the description. You can also support my work on an ongoing basis by joining my Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. You can get early releases of videos like this one, talk to me behind the scenes, talk to me about different books that I'm working on. There's also my Amazon wish list linked below if you'd like to nominate books for 2025 for me to review. They're all in there. And you can see which books are for my Stephen Heiner channel and which one are for Palestine Bookshelf. They're pretty obvious. So buy one of those books, send them my way, and I can probably review them in 2025. Also a reminder that a portion of the proceeds from all these different ways that you can support the channel, a portion of that goes towards the Palestine Children's Relief Fund, a really wonderful organization that helps Palestinian children get medical care who could not otherwise get it. There's a link to them in the description below. Please go visit, support their work directly or support their work indirectly by supporting this channel. Until next time, enjoy your reading.